Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast, a podcast to give families a new point of support as they navigate the NICU journey. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful. Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast. I'm excited to speak with our guests today, fellow NICU parent. Kasey Mathews is a mother of two, a holistic life coach, inspirational speaker, and the award-winning author of Preemie, Lessons in Love, Life, and Motherhood, and A Mom's Guide to Creating a Magical Life. Both books received the Mom's Choice Gold Award, with Preemie also earning the New Hampshire Nonfiction Reader's Choice Award. As a passionate advocate for premature birth awareness, Kasey shares her personal journey as the mother of a preemie through speaking engagements at medical conferences, hospitals, and NICU events. Her mission is to inspire and educate healthcare professionals and families, bringing hope and insight to those navigating the challenges of premature birth. Kasey and her husband call New Hampshire home and are currently adjusting to life with an empty nest. Welcome, Kasey, to the NICU Today podcast.
Thank you, Martha. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad that we were connected a while back, and have loved getting to hear more about your family's journey. But share a little bit about that with our listeners today.
Yeah, so I was a mom who took childbirth for granted. I had my firstborn on his due date, weighing 8 pounds, and I thought, oh, that's how this works. And then halfway through my second pregnancy, I went into premature labor, and we did everything we could to hold it off. There was no indication I was not a high-risk pregnancy. There was nothing that alerted us to this. And within 24 hours, I'd given birth to our daughter, Andy. It took 5 minutes to even know we had, whether it was a boy or girl, and it was pure, chaos and trauma. And she was whisked away to the NICU before I ever saw her. And we were in Boston, and she was there for 84 days, 4 major surgeries. And we lived a good hour away from the hospital. So I had a 2-year-old at home and a newborn in the hospital. And it was life, juggling the two.
How did you get through that? How did you get through having a baby, little one at home, and then also baby in the NICU?
Yeah, so the community rallied around us, and we'd only been in this town a few years, and we're both working, didn't know a ton of people. And it was just all of a sudden, there's this food train coming and all these people showing up to help us. And my reaction was, oh my goodness, how are we ever going to pay these people back? We can't accept all this. So it was the beginning of all these lessons that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is just these lessons after lessons, but that really big one of allowing other people to help. So suddenly this woman from book group said, I've got daycare arranged for Tucker so that you can go in every day from 9 to 12, that type of thing. So it was pretty amazing. I was really blessed.
Well, I did want to ask you about the first book that you wrote. So what led you to kind of taking that leap to write this book, and what do you want the readers to get out of it?
Yeah, so Martha, I kept looking for the book. I kept thinking, I can't be alone in feeling the enormity of the fear that I was feeling. I had this pervasive anxiety during the NICU, after the NICU, and I kept looking for some other woman, some other mom who'd walked in my shoes to say, you're not alone, you'll get through this. And I also had so many fears that a mother would never dare say out loud, that I wrote in the book, in like these safe pages, but oh, who would dare as a mother to speak this out loud? And as the years passed and I wasn't getting better from this anxiety, and I was just in this constant state of fear and worry, I thought, I can't be the only mom of a medically fragile child who's ever felt this way. So I'm going to stand up and share my truths. And, if that truth helps one other mom know she's not alone, then it was worth writing down. And I keep a quote on my desk. The Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wilds, wrote, if you tell the truest, hardest, deepest story you have within you, you're not going to step into the light and find that you're alone. You're going to be surrounded by people that are there with you. And that's exactly what happened. It was just this like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying what I've been feeling, but wouldn't ever dare to say out loud.
Can you tell us a little more about some of the topics that you cover in your book? Just thinking about listeners who might be going through the NICU right now. What were some of the other areas that really stood out to you?
Yeah, so the book is in two parts. So it really is, the first part is our NICU journey. And all these moments, it was like I went through that with a video recorder, and it just was like everything was just sort of taken in and recorded in my mind so that I transcribed it into this book. And there were these moments of, people talk about the roller coaster, these up and downs. So an example of that in the beginning was this doctor who was really horrible to me and spoke in this way that was shocking. At the same time, he said to me, get off the roller coaster and ride the carousel. This whole journey is going to be a roller coaster. You don't have to let it be. So there were these like moments, these nuggets that was like, oh my goodness. And there were these moments of just grace and magic that came in the midst of all this craziness that were such a blessing. And then part two of the book is life after the NICU. And this is where I really dive deep into the alternative modalities that we explored. And I always am really careful to say that actually complementary, because we had the phenomenal support of traditional medicine, and then we complemented it with all these alternative therapies that we discovered along the way. So it's a book about the NICU journey, but big picture, it's a story of my transformation and my waking up to realize like there's so much going on beyond my control, and the story of surrendering and all these gifts and lessons that came along with what I thought was the worst thing that could have ever happened to us.
Mhm. Well, and I definitely want to get back into your post NICU life, but looking back at the NICU experience when you were there and you were traveling back and forth, what stands out to you the most from that time?
Oh, there's a gazillion lessons, like I was saying, but the overarching big thing is that it was really like how I show up matters. And that in order to show up for my baby to be whole and healthy, I have to be whole and healthy. That, that my energy, the fear that is oozing out of me that I'm bringing in is like, I've got to take responsibility for this. I've got to do what I can do. So, on the day where I'm showing up and I've had nothing to eat and I'm, basically going on coffee and cookies, as opposed to the day I took that 5 minutes to actually feed myself some breakfast so that I could show up centered and grounded and present to her. That was the big difference. So I feel like, in retrospect, if I could go back and give myself that, it's like, yes, thank you to that person who put those snack bags in my car and the bottles of water, and taking that time to care for myself, to show up in this more grounded, fuller, better place for my baby. That's what she
Mhm.
needed from me. And,
Yes.
that extends into life as a whole, well beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to jump back into life post NICU. So, when you talk about alternative modalities paired with the medical care and different things like that, what did your life look like post NICU?
I thought like, okay, we take the baby home, which first of all, I was terrified about. I kept saying like, I'm not a nurse. I'm not a nurse. She came home with an ostomy bag. The week before bringing her home, she stops breathing when she's eating, all of this. So when we got home, I thought, okay, well, at least life will be quiet and calm. And it was anything but. It was, 3 times a week early intervention, coming in with all these different therapists, and then all the different doctor's appointments and taking her back into Boston. It was so it wasn't calm. And if anything, I was even more anxious because I didn't have a medical team or staff around me supporting me. This was all on me. So, and my husband was back at work. So it was really, really incredibly difficult. And that was when I thought, there's two paths here. Like I can just let, life take me, or I can do something about this. And that's when I, started opening myself up to these alternative modalities and learning what I could do to heal myself and in turn, help the kids to come into wholeness.
Well, can you talk to us more about that? What were some of the things that you did?
Yeah, so it started out really by working with this doctor of naturopathic medicine who's holistic, and I learned about homeopathy. I learned something called brain gym, which I love so much. It's about activating both sides of the brain at the same time. And in the midst of all this, we didn't know until we did know that Andy's lungs were super weak because the lungs weren't an issue throughout the NICU. And then she contracted RSV and they were, really, it was a moment. We almost lost her. And we were told she'll have asthma for the rest of her life as a result of the damage from the RSV. So that was okay, let me see how I can prove you wrong. So I went to a physical therapy shop and I bought kazoos and whistles and everything I possibly could to strengthen those lungs. And no child has ever spent more time outside in these New England winters, breathing in that cold air. And her eyes, there was a surgery on her eyes. So we were told there's nothing you can do to strengthen them. And yet I had balance beams and dropping with a patch on one and dropping bean bags and buckets along the way and a wiffle ball suspended from the ceiling, hitting that with patches. So there were all these things that I did to empower myself and learn about, and cranial sacral therapy and Reiki. I mean, it's a long list. But all of that was not only so helpful and healing for Andy, but for all of us as a family.
Well, and I think it goes back to, it's so hard. You feel so overwhelmed when you leave the NICU and try not, especially if you have a baby that has a difficult prognosis going home and you really don't know what their future is going to look like. And none of us do for any of our children. But I would say in particular for some of these NICU miracles that come home, and what we say to parents is you're going to do the best that you can to help them feel successful as possible.
Yeah.
And so we all advocate, just like all the things that you're talking about that you learn to do. Some people might not be able to do all of that, but they've called early intervention as soon as they've gotten home. They've gotten set up with early intervention. They're calling their pediatrician regularly. They're asking questions. They're figuring out what the best therapy is. They're proactive later on in life with their school and helping their child to feel successful in school. And I always use the phrase feel successful because I think every kid feels success in a different way.
Yeah.
So we always use that phrase for Claire and when we talk about her in school or extracurricular activities. But but I think what you're talking about is you did all that you could to help her be as successful as possible.
And it was what I needed to do to make myself feel successful because I was really questioning myself
Yeah.
as a mom. And what I hear you saying reminds me of this moment, and I write about it in the book is, I was told she's really medically fragile. Ask people to take their shoes off when they get to the door. And you would think like, oh, please, is this a big deal? But like, the way I was raised with my mom, it was like this big thing for me until this energy healer I was working with said to me, this is your daughter's life. And she doesn't have a voice. You need to be her voice and her advocate. And it was like this wake up, snap out of it. And, thank you so much. Please leave your shoes at the door. Wash your hands here at the sink. Silly little things like that. But it was so impactful. And that moment of like what you're talking about, parents making these calls, doing what they can do to be the best advocate they can be for their child, given whatever circumstances. for
Yes.
sure.
And one of our other favorite phrases to help their child or children be the best that they can be, whatever that best looks like. So we
Absolutely.
love that phrase.
Yeah.
All right, you've written well, we're going to talk about your other guide, your book that is your newer publication.
Yep.
But I want to talk a little bit just more generally speaking. So when we look at situations that are beyond our control, which would be the
Mhm.
NICU, right? As we both have experienced, it is hard to figure out where to be, right? And how do you center yourself? How do you stay grounded? So let's talk about that in a general sense, because it not only happens in the NICU, but it happens post NICU. It happens for anybody, really.
Yeah.
What's your advice with that?
Well, I think it's all about building your toolbox, and everybody's toolbox looks different, right? So it's like, but what works for you? And a lot of that is trial and error. So, but trying to do it all alone, I think is one of the key things, is opening yourself up to what are the resources out there, not only for your baby, but for you as mom. What can you avail yourself to? One of my favorite tools as we come into these moments of challenge, difficulties with our children as they're moving through life. And it feels like, oh gosh, how are we going to face this? It's so simple, but one of the tools that I recommend and implement is don't start at the starting line. How do you want to feel when this event is over? So imagine that it's already happened and get into that place of, this is how I'm feeling. And it's a subtle energetic shift, but it's really powerful. And it's worked really well for me, and all my clients utilize it. And it can be something as simple as a doctor's appointment. But that, all those triggers that come up for us as we're getting our child off. And so we're in this place of defense on our heels, and what's going to come out of this, as opposed to, actually, here's this is going to look like, and I'm going to feel this way when it's over, and that's the energy I'm moving into that. So there's tools like that I've got so many, but it's certainly, this is not a sprint, it's this long marathon. So it's continuing to accumulate the tools as you move along, but it's the awareness of it. So having your metaphoric toolbox and going, ooh, that's a good one. Or even at the back of your notebook, keeping a list of, what are these things that really ground me? What are these things that really help me stay present? Or who are the people I can turn to when I start to feel things unraveling?
Love that. All right. Well, that's a great segue into my next question, because you've written a second book, and it is A Mom's Guide to Creating a Magical Life,
Yeah.
which I think ties back to, how do we center ourselves? How do we stay grounded? How do we build that magical life? Why did you write this one?
I wrote this book because it was like the next step, right? So now I've got at the time, I guess Andy must have been 11 or 12. She's coming into her teenage years. And it's like, well, who am I now? I've been this parent of a preemie and this advocate and voice for her. And now it's time for her to find her own voice and her own path. And it was this unwinding, and I found myself just, and I know parents can really relate to this, whether their child's medically fragile or not. So this book was about, okay, mom, where are you now? And rediscovering yourself, not giving up, role as mom, because that's always essential, but let's turn the spotlight back on you a bit and see what are the ways you can move through life and take such great care of yourself that you continue to show up as this phenomenal mom for your children. So it's this turning point in the road, I guess, in the journey.
Well, that is so true. I feel like I'm living that right now, Kasey. I think I need to get a copy of that one,
Absolutely.
because with moving into the teenage world and becoming their own, sharing their own story, all of that, we're certainly living through that right now. Where can listeners find out more about your publications and more about you?
Right on my website. So it's Kasey with a K and Mathews with one T. And then I'm on, all the social outlets of Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and that type of stuff. And the books are available on, all the national bookstores online or in, brick and mortar and all that.
Yes. And how are your children doing today?
They're fantastic. Andy just graduated from college in May. It's been interesting because she moved to Boston and she's living very, very close to the hospital where she lived, which is just this wild moment. And the retinopathy that she had laser surgery for, it's starting to unwind a little bit. So she's at Mass Eye and Ear being closely followed. And the doctor's saying, hey, you're a 23-year-old experiment. We didn't know how this was going to unfold, and we're just watching and waiting and seeing. And she's actually turning 24. So here we are. And then Tucker continues to be, you read about him throughout the book, and just this really solid kind of like Buddha-like grounding force. And he continues to be that. As Andy and I might tend to go, oh no, run, off we go. And he pulls us back down along with my husband, Lee. And he has had this amazing, interesting journey. And he's now a pilot and on his on his path doing all that.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all of that. And it would be really interesting to hear about the eyes and how that works, because many of us have babies who had eye surgery in the NICU and,
Yep.
seeing what happens down the road for sure. All right. Last question for you.
Okay.
Last piece of advice. Anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
I guess, yeah, thank you. Easier said than done. But at the same time, this perspective shift of, when we signed up for this journey as parents, as moms, these children come along and they are our greatest teachers. So these challenges, these difficulties, the reframe of seeing them as opportunities and lessons, again, please, I get it. Easier said than done. But even if just that's, another little tool in your toolbox, just taking that moment, what am I meant to learn here? Why is this all happening? It can be a huge, profound shift.
Wonderful.
So,
Kasey
yeah.
Mathews, author, speaker, coach. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate all of your thoughts, and congrats on all of your publications. And give us your website one more time.
It's KaseyMathews.com.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you for tuning in to the NICU Today podcast, brought to you by Today is a Good Day. Learn more at todayisagoodday.org.